Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad to start this first webinar together with my colleague from the British Embassy, Councillor Rachel King. Thank you so much. It will be an interactive video, and if you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A tool to help our moderator, Jürgen Renn, to raise your question to our distinguished guest. I will immediately give the floor now to my colleague Rachel King for his initial remarks. Please, Rachel, have the floor.
Thank you very much, Francesco, and good morning from me. My name is Rachel. I'm the Economic and European Affairs Councillor at the British Embassy in Berlin. And I'm absolutely delighted to open this event today to celebrate the partnership between the UK and Italy in hosting the COP26 climate conference next year. And it's really a wonderful opportunity for us in the UK to have this opportunity to work with Italy so closely to drive progress on climate action. As many of you will know, the COP conference was supposed to take place this autumn, but due to the Covid-19 crisis, it has unfortunately had to be delayed until next year. But the upside is that that gives us even more time to drive up ambition and to plan a truly ambitious event. We're really facing twin crises right now of both climate change and also a crisis in biodiversity. The other advantage that delaying COP26, the climate conference, until 2021 gives us is that it puts it into the same year as the COP15 biodiversity conference. And we in the UK are determined to use that coming together of time frame to drive synergies in action as well. And that's all the more important when we reflect on how COVID-19 has been a really horrible demonstration of what can happen when the relationship between us humans and the natural environment in which we live breaks down. Nature-based solutions more widely will be a core theme of the UK's COP26. And as part of that, the Dasgupta review on the economics of biodiversity has been central to the UK's efforts to promote this agenda and a core part of our contribution. We believe that it is absolutely essential to bring about a change of mindset on how we assess these ecosystem services. One of the very senior panel members of that review, Dame Fiona Reynolds, is joining us today, and I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to welcome her to this discussion. And then finally, I would just like to thank once again my Italian colleagues, in particular Francesco, for their partnership, and to look forward to the event this morning. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Is nature sending us a message? The nexus between biodiversity loss and the rise of global pandemics is at the center of the policy debate among governments and scientific institutions alike. Yesterday, the Federal Minister for Environment, Schulze, convened on this topic a high-level seminar to discuss how to promote in the international community the establishment of a new ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Italy, alongside the UK, is keen to join this effort. Next year, we will host the pre-COP and the post-COP in Italy, and the UK will host the COP26 in Glasgow. Our parallel G20 and G7 presidency will also be conducive to a stronger engagement in the international community to find a common way out of the coronavirus crisis. Such way out must embrace societal as well as environmental concerns. And once again, science is called to lead the way in the society. Scientific evidence is confirming us that the risk of pandemic outbreaks increases the more nature is destroyed. Committed nature conservation and landscape regeneration in urban areas are thus key to preventing new infectious diseases. The exact transmission route of the novel coronavirus from animals to humans has not been yet conclusively researched. However, it is well documented through a solid track record that around 70% of all human pathogens originate from fauna, including HIV, Ebola, MERS, and SARS. The risk of transmission is particularly high in degraded suburban areas. In the view of scientists, there is even a more fundamental risk of animal-to-human transmission when ecosystems are thrown out of balance due to human intervention. I'm glad of this first webinar we organized with the UK Embassy, and I wish to thank deeply our friend and partner, Stefano Boeri, founder of Stefano Boeri Architetti and chairman of La Triennale in Milan, for being with us today. More outreach events from us will come ahead of our climate summits in 2021, starting with the European Sustainable Development Week next September in all Europe and in Berlin. I am now glad to introduce now Professor Jürgen Renn, Director of the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science and a long-lasting friend and partner of Italian scientific institution. Jürgen, you published in January a thoughtful and enlightening book, The Evolution of Knowledge, Rethinking Science for the Anthropocene, where you observed that, and I quote, diseases are not only part of biological evolution. They are also part of cultural, and they are becoming also a challenge of epistemic evolution as well. They have emerged, for instance, from contact between humans and animals in the domestication processes. Today, global traffic, global nutrition chains, and global inequality of living conditions have set a new stage for the emergence and spread of bacterial and viral diseases. Diseases may constitute challenges that affect societies on a global scale. Dear Jürgen, you couldn't be more exact in your assumption, which was no prediction, as it reflects our reality we have been living in the last decades without maybe before COVID and well before social media. So on this note, please, Jürgen, please, Professor Dr. Renn, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Dame Fiona Reynolds, dear Stefano Boeri, dear Councillors King and Leone. First of all, I would like to thank the British and the Italian embassies for setting up this wonderful panel to address a major issue of our time, biodiversity from different perspectives. Actually, I hope these perspectives will, after all, not be so different in view of the dire consequences of biodiversity loss and what needs to be urgently done about it. I also want to thank Councillors King and Leone for their superb introductions, which have emphasized the most important events and measures on the political level, giving a thorough overview in a very short time, which is actually an important skill for a panel discussion that also has a very narrow time frame. I'm personally very grateful for the honorable invitation to moderate this discussion with two highly esteemed academics. I hope that we will touch upon the main aspects in the next hour. I'm sure actually we could start talking for hours and hours about this. Biodiversity is, in short, a term that describes a measure of variation of life on this planet on different levels, from genes to species to the entire ecosystem. For many years now, the diversity within nature has experienced a rapid and alarming decrease caused by the human impact on the Earth system. This has resulted in major threats to the basic ecological and nutritional foundations of human societies, including new threats to global health, as we see unfolding in the current pandemic, itself caused by a zoonotic spillover. Humans account for only 0.01% of the biomass on Earth, equivalent only to all the termites on Earth or to the ocean's krill. Still, as a kind of super predator species, we basically eat up the world's food web. Humans are not only consuming, but also homogenizing Earth's flora and fauna, a possibly unique process in the metazoan stage of evolution. Around 1 million species already face extinction, many within decades, unless action is taken to reduce the intensity of the drivers of biodiversity loss. Without such action, there will be a further acceleration in the global rate of species extinction, which is already tens to hundreds of times higher than it has averaged over the past 10 million years. The Living Planet Index shows that species have declined rapidly since 1970, with reductions of 40% for terrestrial species, 84% for freshwater species, and 30% for marine species. Researchers now believe that we are culpable of a sixth mass extinction in evolutionary history. What are the reasons for this massive impact? Among the direct drivers are the intensification of land and sea use, climate change, pollution, and the spread of invasive alien species. All of these changes are characteristic of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, the proposed new geological epoch characterized by the planetary impact of humans. Some of the most dramatic changes that characterize the developing Anthropocene are taking place within the biosphere, the highly interconnected fabric of life which characterizes our planet. More specifically, the existential threat represented by the dramatic loss of biodiversity should be seen as the result of increasing interactions between the biosphere and the technosphere constructed by humans, forming a techno-biosphere. A central driver of this techno-biosphere is the food system and its planetary expansion, which risks to breach planetary boundaries. The crossing of the species barrier of SARS-CoV-2, possibly at a Wuhanese wet market, from bat to pangolin to a human, and then across the entire world, is a pressing example of how biological and social systems are tightly coupled. Climate change-driven species migration, habitat fragmentation, deforestation, and the encroachment of human settlements and agriculture into tropical and other forests cause ecosystem stresses and create close contact between humans and fauna. The genetic homogeneity in intensive livestock farming is a further breeding ground for communicable diseases. In short, human health is intimately connected with planetary health, a concept that captures the interdependence between human societies and ecosystems. The concept of planetary health is essential to realize that human societies and their environment are more closely coupled to each other than we commonly think. The corona pandemic may have helped us, though, to better understand this global connectivity and our mutual interdependency. On the political and practical levels, this implies that we must manage the current crisis in such a way as to shape our recovery in a sustainable way, and with the aim to enhance the world's resilience against future crises, as we will no doubt have to face them as a result of continuing climate change and the ongoing exploitation of natural resources. How to manage a sustainable recovery, how to successfully struggle against biodiversity loss, and how to find new ways to manage the techno-biosphere, also on the level of urban planning, will be central to our discussion. And now let me briefly introduce to you our panelists, and I would like to begin with Dame Fiona Reynolds, who is the Master of Emmanuel College, Cambridge since 2012, which ranks among the top 5 colleges since 1998. Prior to that, she held the position of Director General of the National Trust, Europe's largest conservation charity, which is celebrating 125 years of its existence this year. Before her position at the Trust, she was director of the Women's Unit of the UK Cabinet Office. Her intensive dedication to environment and conservation led to her appointment as Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1998, and 10 years later, in 2008, she was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. A truly distinguished academic among us. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you.
You are also a member of the advisory panel of the Dasgupta review that has already been managed. The Dasgupta review deals with the economics of biodiversity and is an independent global review which is led by Professor Sir Partha Dasgupta, chair of the management board of the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at the University of Cambridge. The review is commissioned by the UK government's Economic and Finance Ministry, in short, the Treasury. It aims at exploring the sustainability of our engagements with nature and what needs to be changed in order to support our general well-being and that of the generations to come. It will be published in October this year, shortly before the 15th meeting of the COP, the Conference of Parties, this year, to the Convention of Biological Diversity in Kunming, China in October. The interim report came already out in 2020 and is available on the web. Fiona Reynolds' highly acclaimed book, The Fight for Beauty, Our Path to a Better Future, was published in 2016. In this book, she presents an alternative route to a better future through the inspiration of what is truly beautiful. Dear Fiona, in your book you say, and I quote, "We live in a world where the drive for economic growth is crowding out everything that can't be given a monetary value. We are stuck in a treadmill where only the material things in life gain traction, and it's getting harder to find space for the things that really matter, but money can't buy, including our future." End of quote. This is a remarkable, actually a wonderful statement that seems to call for a radical change of our ways of living, including the ways in which our economies work. Can such a far-reaching change really happen in the time to cope with the current threats of biodiversity loss and climate change? And do you think that the COVID pandemic has changed the parameters of what we feel really matters?
Yes, I do. I think during the COVID crisis, two things have happened. First of all, people have rediscovered nature. We've been locked down in our homes and only allowed a walk a day. And people have connected with nature in a way that for many is completely new and has been a wonderful transformative experience. And lots of people are saying that the slowing down of life and the changed pace is something they want to hang on to. And that is definitely something. It's been an experience that money can't buy, but has been really meaningful. The second thing that's happened is that many people have initially, because they had to, because there were all kinds of problems in food supply, but have rediscovered local food produced sustainably, people buying from farm shops or local suppliers, and have started to connect with not just nature, but with the process of food production. And actually are saying also in response to COVID that actually that the less of a consumer focus on life and more interest in where food comes from and the joys of cooking, of being in their community, has actually been very enriching. So yes, I think things have changed. The question is, will we just go back to where we were, or can we grab the benefits in this awful time? There have been some benefits, and those are two of them.
Thank you for this very succinct and most of all for this very encouraging answer. I'm sure we will explore the theme later in our discussion. But I now come to our second discussion partner, which is Stefano Boeri. He's professor of architecture, urban planner, and also a renowned author. He earned a master's degree in architecture from the Milan Polytechnical University and a PhD in architecture from the University of Venice. He is the founder of Stefano Boeri Architetti and received international recognition for his vertical forests and gardens surrounding skyscrapers in Milan, initiative that may one day be adopted as a standard for sustainable housing within densely populated cities. The US Green Building Council elected Stefano Boeri and his entire team as pioneers of biodiversity and published an official recognition, the Certificate of Professional Leadership, and I quote from that, for their commitment to transforming living architecture through biophilic design, aware of natural biodiversity, and to their vision and projects of a future city sustainable and accessible to all. Thanks to the Vertical Forest Initiative, the US Green Building Council and the Green Business Certification Incorporated revolutionized the global approach of how buildings are designed, built, and maintained. They represent the most widespread certification system for green buildings in the world and are together developing new parameters in order to include the presence of greenery and trees in certification protocols. Stefano Boeri's work ranges from the production of urban visions to the design of architectures and open spaces, including several waterfronts, such as Naples, Trieste, Genova, La Maddalena, Doha, Marseille, and Thessaloniki, with a constant focus on the geopolitical and environmental implications of urban situations. In Stefano Boeri's view, COVID stressed the need for intense discussions between politicians and academics and calls for change with regards to the distribution, sustainability measures, and rural responses to human needs. He argues that COVID can be utilized as a trigger for politicians and governments, including the Italian government, to respond with additional funding for regeneration projects and for working on a new recovery plan. Stefano, Milan and the whole north of Italy have been hit very hard by the corona pandemic, and I've seen this as an eyewitness because I was there in the beginning of this year. And you have developed new ideas of how our urban environment should change in response to the crisis, as a model in which coexistence between humans and nature, fossil-free mobility and health play fundamental roles. Can you tell us a little more about your vision on how Milan could look different in 2030?
Thank you, thank you. No, well, I first of all, let me start with a very, very brief reflection on fragility, because I believe that the real legacy of what's happened, it's that we are aware of the fragility of our species, and we are fragile in our technocratic ambitions to govern nature. We are fragile in our ability to make predictions. We discover also, but we are fragile also, let's say, in our desperate will to be alive in the world. Now this let's say, tragedy, this pandemic, as in a sort of way, without being a war, swept away hundreds of thousands of live bodies from the surface of the earth in a few weeks. So the point is that we have to be, let's say, aware of this fragility. What's happening? We have to be aware of this fragility, and at the same time, we have to, let's say, try to imagine how we can adopt a different perspective on the relation between, let's say, our species and the other living species. No, it's not simply about the new balance between, let's say, forest and cities. It's really the necessity to adopt a new perspective. I think the concept of a new anthropocentrism is the best way to try to answer to your question. So new anthropocentrism means that we have to, let's say, not abandon the pedestal of life of dominant species, but be capable to adopt the point of view of the other species when we are talking about nature. And then a second issue, and ending on that, it's about the new relation with forest and woodlands, and this is a necessity. Going back to Milano, we know well that the pulmonary fragility, the weakness, was one of the reasons of the diffusion of the virus in a region like Milano or Lombardy or Madrid or in the Hubei region in China. So we have to seriously take in consideration the urgency of changing the condition of our, let's say, environmental. So the air pollution is one serious issue, and we have to immediately try to improve the quality of air related with fine dust. Right. So we have to work very seriously on that.
So thank you very much, Stefano. You both brought up important points that we will develop. Fiona, you started really from the experience that we have made during Corona time of a kind of a local experience, both of food production and the local experience of nature. Yet on the other hand, you are a member of the advisory panel of the Dasgupta report that we already discussed, and their perspective is not precisely local, I have to say. And but it addresses the point that Stefano just brought up, namely the point of urgency. So the report called urgent global, I might say, reconceptualization of the economy. And so, of course, there's a tension in the room between these local experiences that we all share and the need for urgent action, not just on local, but on global levels. And so, if I understand it correctly, the report views nature as an asset, just like human and produced capital, but acknowledges that the human economy is embedded and not external to nature. So it would be really helpful if you could address some of the thinking behind the report, concepts such as inclusive wealth, what it really means, and what makes the difference of this report with respect to prior reports. But let's not forget this tension between the local and the global, which is really essential for what we're discussing.
You're absolutely right. What the Dasgupta review is doing is completely reframing the way that we see nature. For so long, we've seen people as somehow separate from nature, and our economy has been blind when it comes to thinking about the impacts on nature. And so the first thing we're saying is that we are completely dependent on and inextricably part of nature. And that leads to an assessment that says that essentially we've relied on nature for too long to provide us with our needs, to the extent that we have now passed the point where nature's ability to regenerate can be managed. And so we're winding nature down. As indeed Rachel said right at the beginning, we've reached a point of crisis in biodiversity. And because we've been prioritizing the economy for so long in our economic and other policies, we have, and we calculate that roughly since the 1950s, we've been in a state where we now can no longer say that we're living in a sustainable environment. So what must we do? Well, the most important thing we need to do is to stop living beyond nature's capacity to regenerate. Nature is a wonderful thing. It can regenerate, but we're living too fast and too exploitatively to allow it to regenerate. And therefore, we need to change the economic signals of the world that we're living in and to reprioritize nature. And so the idea of inclusive wealth that we talk about is essentially about putting into the frame produced human and natural goods and seeing them all as part of the responsibilities that we have. So in the past, we focused just on produced goods or on human capital and not on natural capital. If we do that, we can change the metrics, change the calculations, and change our priorities to give nature the place that it needs to be at the very heart of our thinking.
And the way that the local comes in, I understand that the concept of inclusive wealth is closely related to the concept of social well-being. And
right, but I think what I think it then does, if you reframe the sort of central driving principles of the way we run our economy and our society and understand our dependence on nature, then actually when you get to the local level, much of it then is about people and the responses. I mean, we're not economic creatures, we are human creatures. And actually we've taken nature for granted. The local argument is one of saying, well, actually, we now understand how important nature is to all of our lives. We can encourage people to change their consumer habits, change their practices, to start to respect nature in the way that it needs to be respected if we're going to protect the planet that we are completely dependent on.
Thank you. I think your comments make it clear that behind the report is really a fundamental rethinking also of what economics mean. So of course the natural question is, once it will be finalized in the fall, what impact will it have on financial and economic decision-making in the UK and beyond?
Well, the report itself is obviously to our government department, to the Treasury, and we hope very much that the Treasury will itself start to rewrite the rules of engagement, because at the moment the incentives are very much focused on economic growth and short-term, narrowly based mechanisms that really prioritize produced economy and to some extent human, but not natural capital. So we need the rules to change. If the rules change, the report will have enormous impact. If they don't change, we will still be saying we have the same problem for many years to come.
Yeah, but I think it's not just addressed to the government and to the officials, it's also directed at a larger public audience. And this brings me to the issue of communication. And I know you have had a lot of experience. You have held senior positions at the BBC for 5 years. And
yeah.
With the National Trust, you have a lot of experience in communication. So, so what is your perspective on communicating this new attitude?
Well, communication is really vital, but so is education. And actually, too many of our children grow up today without contact with nature. We don't have a focus on nature education. We have biology at secondary school level, but you know, the ability to identify wildflowers and the ability to appreciate nature, we've deprived our children far too much over the last few generations. So if we can rebuild people's connection with nature, and the COVID crisis has helped with that, then I think we can start to communicate. These are the things we need to do as individuals and as families to better protect nature, to play our part, and that may mean changes in what we buy, changes in the clothes that we wear, or the responsibilities that we as consumers hold should change so that we play a broader role in identifying how we can all respect the natural environment and look after it much better than we have done.
Thank you, Fiona. Let me turn to Stefano, because the way that people experience nature is not that by going into the woods or into the gardens, it's within the cities, and urbanization is rapidly growing all over the world. Ever more mega cities emerge. You have worked in some of them. And so I would like to invite you to talk a little bit about these changed experiences of nature within urban environments.
Yeah, well, I think seeing forests that, for instance, about forestation, it becomes more and more urgent. It's a fundamental necessity. It's around the cities and continuous system of trees inside them cleans the air by absorbing fan dust. They shade the public spaces, avoiding excessive heating. They reduce CO2. So, well, cities are covering the 3% of the surface of the emergent land of the planet, but they produce the 70–75% of the CO2 which is present in our atmosphere. Forests and woodlands that are covering the 30% of the planet are absorbing the 40–45% of that CO2. So in a way, I think that forestation, urban forestation, is probably the most efficient, economic, and let's say inclusive way to try to tackle global warming in our urban environment. So I believe this is a very, 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 and what I see is that there are many cities in the world that are creating networks related to deforestation. But we have other, let's say, very important steps to do. And one, for instance, is more urgent. It's about the opportunity to desynchronize the lifetime. So I think we have to imagine that our cities that are based on a structure of few great attractors of crowds, schools, public buildings, headquarters, malls, well, we have to redesign the times of the cities, and that's very important. And the second issue is about how we can rethink open spaces as place where we not only commerce and mobility, but also culture, entertainment, sports must be able to express, manifest themselves. So it's two fundamental steps we have to do immediately in our urban environments.
You spoke in your introduction earlier about fragility, and I think you referred to the fragility of nature, but also to the fragility of the human shell that we are building around us, what I like to call the technosphere. But there is another fragility that you must have experienced as an urban planner and as an architect. You know, there are many stakeholders involved in large projects, and what you propose is a fundamental rethinking. It's a bit of a similar problem that we discussed with Fiona. It's rather radical, this you know, this new view of the city and the new view of buildings. So, you know, how optimistic are you that this will not remain a utopian dream? Because you yourself spoke about the urgency of realizing some of these visions. So how optimistic are you in the end?
Well, I'm not optimistic. I believe that we have to seriously consider how this crisis is related with climate crisis. So the pandemic crisis and the climate crisis are, let's say, linked one to the other, and we cannot split into two parts. So I believe and I hope that we will start to transform the awareness of this fragility in the capacity to, let's say, to act. And in my opinion, we have also to start to imagine a new, let's say, condition life in our city. So, for instance, I believe we have to move from the idea of a city where we have, let's say, a certain number of epicenters that are big attractors of crowd, to a kind of new geography of city, where cities are made up of a series of self-sufficient districts or urban villages, each of which, let's say, give us to the citizen the opportunity to reach, to access schools and services within a geographic radius of 500 meters or a temporal radius of 15, 20 minutes. So I think this concept of how cities should start to work in the future, it's fundamental if we want to be pragmatic and to, let's say, be optimistic on the opportunity to let's say, also not forget what this pandemic has teach us.
It's a bit counterintuitive, because traditionally the dispersion of megacities was seen as a menace also to biodiversity. But you are shaping a concept of a widespread megalopolis. Can you say a word more on, you know, how you turn what is seemingly a problem into a solution?
No, I think dispersion, exodus from city is, let's say, is something that we could see in the next future. In a way, we have already seen some views of this phenomenon. But in Europe, we have experienced in the 80s and 90s of the century a phenomenon of dispersion, of sprawl, of urban sprawl, who was destroyed part of our landscapes. So in Italy, in France, in Germany, we have seen this, let's say, scattered single family houses with small malls everywhere without any rules, and that is faster, and we cannot accept to see this disaster coming back. So I believe that if we will have to deal with this trend, we have to try to govern, to orient it. And my opinion is that we have an amazing, let's say, legacy in Europe, that is this presence of thousands and thousands of, let's say, villages on the mountain and territory of our continent. And I believe we have to work in order to see how we can repopulate the historical villages that in French, in Italy, in Germany, and in UK too, are sometimes abandoned or semi-abandoned. And the point is not simply to go back to a kind of nostalgic view of how countryside would give us a certain relation with nature. I think we have to seriously believe and to study how we can delocalize our urban life in this different vision, in these historical villages. And if it's possible, I think it's about a kind of reciprocity between this and historical villages. We have to work on that. There are some experience in Europe, in French, for instance, that are extremely, let's say, fertile, how we can redefine this relation.
Thank you, Stefano. One last short question, or with a plea to give a short answer. You're not just a visionary, you're also a planner, and you have a lot of experience with the stakeholders, the authorities, and so. And in the COVID crisis, we have really experienced how important planning, coordination is. And so, what do you see as possible and necessary measures to enhance the efficiency of the planning processes that we need on a national, on the EU level, in order to implement some of the visions?
Question. I think that we have to fix two very strong rules. We should not pretend to govern everything. We should not have the ambition to predetermine and predict the future. It's much more important that we fix some very simple and strong rules, like avoiding the consumption of soil, like this idea of real balance between forests and cities. And let's say third, this opportunity to repopulate the historical villages. So I believe in that necessity to be strong in being clear and simple in our issues.
That certainly has helped us in the current crisis. I agree with you. So thank you very much, Stefano and Fiona, for this round. And now we open up the discussion to the audience. And I have to look a little bit in the instruments that I have here in order to collect questions. There is one question that I see, and as you cannot see them yourself, I will read it to you. It's a question by Richard Field to all of the participants. What is the role of travel in the panelists' vision for the future? How much of a role for public transport? How much focus on electronic means of bringing people together with all the benefits of that, rather than face-to-face? And Dr. Richard Field comes from the University of Nottingham in the UK. So thank you very much for that question, first of all. Who wants to take up the question?
I can begin very briefly. I think the role of travel is absolutely crucial, because travel at the moment is contributing massively to our environmental problems. There are some good signals from COVID about people who have learned to work from home, and I suspect the whole shape of offices and people traveling every day to offices will change. People may still need to go occasionally, but I'm quite sure that some things that we've learned during this crisis will stick with us. But of course, in the short term, there is a real risk that people will stop using public transport because of the fears of disease communication. And if we get out of the habit of using public transport, it's even harder to get people back into it. And of course, a future sustainable world requires public transport for efficiency reasons, but also for climate and other reasons. But, and this may come back to Stefano's point, if we have beautiful, livable cities where people can walk to the shops and walk their children to school and walk to work and walk to the doctor's surgery, rather than having to travel and get in a car and go miles. So I have a vision where we rebuild not only our cities, but our market towns, our suburbs, around walkability. Of course, people will always need to travel, but if you can get most of your needs on a local basis, I think we have a chance of doing something quite exciting.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I'm sure Stefano wants to add to this.
No, I totally agree with Fiona. So I think it's absolutely important now to redefine the cycle of live in our cities. And well, from another view, I think that during the lockdown, we experienced not only a gigantic complication, but also the opportunity to think of a different weekly time-space cycle. You know? So it's probably we're going to work much more from home and to move less in the city and the territory. So we have to transform a complication into an opportunity, and I think Fiona is totally right in that.
I generally want to add just that we need to evaluate the experiences that we have. For instance, the experiences that we have with means of digital communication. We certainly had underexploited their potential. You know, we have more international meetings without travel than we ever had before. That's certainly an advantage. But we also have to think of what it means for the education system, for schools, for instance. And there it is, you know, again, there's an untouched potential, but there are also some dangers because social spaces are important. And I generally would opt for, you know, a careful examination of these experiences. This is a test case, if you want, that we are experiencing right now. And it would be very important, not just to form opinions, but to, you know, really do a careful evaluation of the experience. So there, you know, apparently we have exhaustively answered questions because there are no further questions, but I really want to encourage the audience to become active. Again, you know, we are in a learning experience of this digital mode of communication. So, you know, I just see the panelists, I imagine the audience, and I can see it's interested, and, you know, I want to encourage it to become active as well.
There is a new question, actually. I can see it.
Yeah, you are one step ahead of me, Fiona. So I thought I can see. Oh, now I see it in the F&A because the previous one was in the chat. So, how can we ensure the crisis doesn't strengthen existing inequalities? I might immediately add that's one issue being discussed for the educational system. It seems working from home, online education, digital tools for information, communication, but also consumption, interaction, won't be accessible for all in the same ways. That addresses also the point that you made with private transport. You know, I mentioned the schooling issue. You know, if you have advantageous conditions at home, you know, you kind of continue the already existing advantages. So in that sense, the question seems to be very, very justified. How would the others respond to it?
I think it's been shocking, actually, how the COVID crisis has revealed and intensified inequalities. It's been really clear that some people living particularly without any access to green space or in very small accommodation, the children in those families, people have lost their jobs. You know, there's been such an exposure of inequality. And actually, I think one of the recommendations of the Dasgupta review, I'm hoping, will be that we really promote very, very strongly the importance of access to nature for everyone, and perhaps particularly for the people who, in the poorest communities, in the most deprived urban areas, who haven't had such access. So there's so many aspects of equality, but for nature, I think it's a human right almost that every child should experience nature directly and should experience the benefits of it.
Yeah, one further tension is, of course, the national versus the international dimension. The immediate measures in the COVID crisis were all sort of aligned with sort of national agendas and national differences. And so I think that's another issue. And that actually relates to other questions that are now coming in. One question is, how can the tensions between land use and agriculture and biodiversity conservation be addressed better? Certainly a problem of great urgency.
Just go back to the first question. I think that in this vision of a city as an archipelago of, let's say, autonomous districts or urban villages, schools, public schools should play a major role as hubs for community. We need schools open every hour of the day, every day of the year, to all the ages, schools that are capable to absorb facilities for citizens. So I think that's the role of schools, of public schools, that is the most important social infrastructure we have in Europe. It's basic, it's very important. About this second issue, well, it's a very important point because intensive agriculture is also one of the cause of fine dust pollution, and we should work seriously on that to imagine a different, let's say, generation of agriculture and farmers that are in condition to change what's happening around our cities, and also it's about to parcelize, to work on the mission of biodiversity, agriculture, and the transformation of agricultural products into food. So it's a very important issue.
Yeah, in Germany, I'm sorry, Fiona, please.
I was going to say, just on the agriculture biodiversity, I mean, agriculture is such an important and significant user of land globally. And yet it's probably one of the causes of the greatest loss of biodiversity globally too. We've got to stop that. We've got to put the two together, and agriculture can be managed so that soil quality is protected and nature is protected alongside farming. You also need other areas to protect nature, but you can do it together. And again, I think this is a moment where we've got to seize that absolute requirement to bring farming and nature back together, to have ecologically sustainable farming, and to ensure that we deliver nature benefits alongside food production.
And as we discussed, this kind of exploitative land use is certainly enhancing the dangers of zoonotic diseases and pandemics.
Yeah.
And you know, topical in these days in Germany, we have a discussion on the meat industry, because some of the industrial sites of the meat industry have been hotspots of corona outbreaks, and so we're having again a discussion on meat production in Germany, which is of course related to the topic. Now I see two other questions. One is a very basic question: how will the pandemic affect Brexit?
Oh dear.
Yes.
I mean, who knows? Actually, I mean. It's so hard to say. I mean, it won't at one level, because we have a timetable which the Prime Minister has said he's going to stick with. And at one level, we may well find ourselves at the end of the year out of the European Union without a deal. So, you know, I'm not going to go there. That would take us all day to discuss. But I hope that the COVID crisis will have as much an impact on the way that we implement policies, whether it's Brexit related or otherwise. This is a chance for us collectively to rethink what really matters and to prioritize long-term instead of short-term thinking, as I said earlier. So I hope Brexit gets picked up and put in that capacious frame.
Do you think this new reframing is easier to implement in small regions instead of big cities? Is a question that Cassandra Pietra di Luce asked us.
Oh, no.
Stefano, is a question.
Yes, I believe that, well, I believe we have not one answer. We have to experiment this new model of life, of urban life, in different contexts. Inside huge metropolitan environment of megalopolis, inside the middle-sized, small-sized cities, and in what we are called historical villages. So it's not we have to now to select where we should live, but it's that we have to transform our urban environment in that direction everywhere.
I agree, we need action at every level. We need action globally. That's why the COP is so important. We need action at the regional, global regional levels. We need action at nation state levels, and we need local action. There's wonderful, wonderful examples of people taking charge of their own future and doing incredible things locally. And we should really encourage that. But they can only really work if they're within a frame that is consistent, which steps right through all the layers of government.
Now questions are flowing in. Here's a question by Flavio D'Abramo. Poor people have been often located in skyscrapers and high dense buildings, following a model a la Corbusier. How can a vertical building or a vertical forest building a la Boeri be made available also for workers and the lower classes of society? What about smaller and shorter buildings in more widely spread cities?
No, well, first of all, I think skyscraper and the high-rise building will change. So we are working now in order to make these buildings more able to be affordable for everybody, and also ready to deal with what's learned from this pandemic. But I think it's possible to imagine a future where green, smart, and high-rise building will be affordable. We are building now in Eindhoven, in Holland, a social housing, high-rise vertical forest, for instance, and it's simply it will, let's see, show this possibility to combine these advantages. But for sure, what I'd love to exclude for the future is let's say, as I was saying before, a simple tendency to go back to the kind of urban sprawl we experienced in 2015 or 30 years ago in Europe. So we have to do our best to stop the consumption of soil, of natural and agricultural soil, and from that point of view, high-rise building are, were, and will be a very important resource.
There are more questions. One of our listeners asked, why do you think nature-based solutions are not more widely implemented vis-a-vis technological solutions? Maybe ask this question separately, and then we have two more questions related to the city issue. Maybe Fiona, you want to take up this question?
Yeah, I think it's really bemusing why nature-based solutions haven't yet got the traction that they should have. And I think it's because they just require a different mindset. You know, if you can fix something technologically by putting up a wind turbine or, you know, fixing carbon emissions, you will. But actually investing in peat bogs or renewing our forests is more complicated and more time consuming, not necessarily more expensive, but we don't. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that's why it's wonderful that the COPs will have this focus on nature-based solutions, because we clearly have to incentivize them and make them easier and more attractive to do, and then we'll get the benefits from them. But it's because we're in that short-term mindset, I think.
So I read the last two questions that we have that are related to the city issue. Now just the third question comes in, but I think I read them, all of them now, because we have come to a close. So in regards, Lucy Holland asks, in regards to the future vision of a metropolis of green cities, do you see forests, marshlands, key habitats, etc., being replaced by a metropolis or being included within a metropolis? Will natural areas be protected or transformed into a new system within the green metropolis? And then we have another question. How can, by Patrick Lutz, how can we prevent the nature-based solution of today to lead to future problems? I.e. our solutions today, this is jumping from one to the other, i.e. our solutions today, especially in urban planning or with geoengineering, should not generate the problem of the next generation. E.g. thinking of new transport systems which start now to coexist with existing infrastructures. I leave it at that. We have two more questions. I'm not sure whether we have the time for them, but let's leave it at these two questions for the moment.
Okay. Well, no, I can answer simply, let's say, going back to an amazing project was developed in a sub-Saharan region where a kind of green wall from, say, Senegal to Ethiopia was built in the last 10 years to stop the extension of the Sahara Desert or south. And it's, let's say, something like 8,000 kilometers long and 15 kilometer large green corridors. And I think we have to seriously study what done there, because we need this kind of connectivity. So we need to imagine that also in Europe, we have to create these ecological corridors that are absorbing cities. So we need greener city in order to make cities not obstacles, but hubs, nodes of this new green corridor that's going to put together parks, protected areas, and cities, and agricultural fields. So it's a new vision of how an entire continent will change in order to find a new balance between artificial environment and natural environment.
Maybe I do admit two last questions and we have to definitely finish. And there are two questions that seem to me to be related. One is by Andrea Timmersfeld. Researchers on climate change and insurance companies warned for years that there will be a pandemic sooner or later, but we obviously didn't listen. How can we make sure that COVID-19 leads to the right conclusions outside of academia? Is the connection between COVID-19 and sustainability emphasized enough? And then there's a question that seems to be strongly related by Veronica Veneziano. What do you think could convince big companies such as multinationals working with global supply chains and motivate them to make a real transformative change in their business systems or mindset? These are very fundamental questions.
These are huge questions. I mean, I suppose for me, you know, there'll be lots of lessons learned about COVID, endless inquiries as to why we weren't prepared and all the rest of it. But the most important thing is that, in a sense, as a society, we have seen the most radical interruption of conventional life than we have ever experienced for generations. No one can remember anything like it. And so I think the issue is whether we can use this opportunity to build back better, which is what we talk about in the UK a lot. People are unfrozen, if you like. They've experienced something different, and I think would be ready, and the business community too, to do things differently and to do things more sustainably, but only if they're given help to do it. And that means help in policy terms, in financial terms, and in governance terms. So to me, we've got to seize this opportunity. And I don't think we have stressed enough that COVID didn't come from nowhere. It came from our exploitation of the natural environment. And we need to get that message home as part of the way that people understand that it's not just a nice to have, it's an essential reframing of our society and our economy.
Thank you, Fiona. Stefano, the last word by you.
No, I agree. I totally agree with. And I think that probably at the beginning we had the feeling that this pandemic was like a sudden, unpredictable event who was changing the life of basically millions of people over the world. But I think now we have understood that this is not a single event. It's simply the last event of a sequence that of X events that are strictly related with the climate crisis, with the financial crisis, and with the issue of inequality. So it's amazing how this, let's say, single unique event was capable to, let's say, to put together all this mission. So I think we should go back to that awareness of fragility that we used at the beginning. We have to be aware of that in order to, let's say, not transform it in weakness, but in a capacity to open a new perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can only add from a German perspective that in the beginning, the discussion was mainly just about the quick recovery of the economy. But both the political and the broader public discussion have led to a more comprehensive perspective that emphasizes notions as sustainability and resilience against future crises. And that's now built into some of the political and economic measures as well.
Good.
I'm slightly optimistic, and I thank you for this really wonderful and enriching discussion. I can see from the reactions and the continuous flow of questions that we're getting in that we could really continue for hours, and maybe we do so in the future. But for now, I think we have to terminate this discussion right now here. Thank you very much for this wonderful exchange.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, everybody. I think it was really a brilliant discussion. Thank you, Stefano. It's always enlightening that you want want to be with us. Thank you also to Dama Fiona Reynolds, who said we are living too fast. Indeed, we are, and there is some striking scientific evidence which shows that by 2050, almost 1 million species will face extinction. So we really now to make sure that among these 1 million species, there will not be the human species. And you provided us with some very, very interesting comments. I just want to pick up one thing that Stefano Boeri was claiming. His team has been working thoroughly in these years to shift a little bit the paradigm between this very city-centric approach, which was the bread and butter of urbanism in the last centuries. We really now to discover a more decentralized way of living, where, of course, the city will stay as epicenter of collective lives, but maybe somehow disconnected by homework schedules. So digital, I think, will play a huge role, and I stay determined to continue together with my colleague Rachel King. I don't know, Rachel, if you are online, but it would be great, I think, if we could greet together our audience. I think we really had a fresh start of our cooperation. We look forward as Embassy to put our cooperation forward until 2021. A lot of outreach efforts will be needed, especially here in Germany, given the fact that by tomorrow Germany will also be the chair of the European Union. And I'm sure that the presidency program, which will be online very soon, will have a strong focus on biodiversity and climate change matters. So again, I look very much forward to our partnership. There is no other countries as the UK, which was so able in the last decade to put forward solid global agendas, both in the G20, which you chair in 2009, and in the G7, so which we will chair next year. So again, for us, it was just a starting point. I thank you so much, Jürgen Renn, for having chaired this fascinating discussion, and I thank you, Stefano, and all the best to Milan, and thank you so much to our UK partners, and we look forward to put forward this conversation in the next months. And for sure, see you again in September, where we will all celebrate also here in Berlin the European Sustainable Development Week. We are also thinking about a new webinar, so please keep on following us in the social media, and let us surprise us with further opportunities for discussion. I think there was really no other moment where governments and science institutions must stay connected. So let's use this connection for good. And again, thank you for everybody, for our public who joined us, and see you very soon in our channels. I give you the floor to Rachel immediately. Please, Rachel.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you very much. I think that all that remains really for me to say is to thank all of our speakers and panel members once again, and to our hosts, our colleagues in the Italian Embassy, and to look forward to continuing to work closely together on this important issue and on many others related to our hosting of COP26 next year. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Bye-bye.